Hey, everybody, and welcome again to Redeeming the Times, where we talk about taking the holidays that have been misconstrued, mislabeled, and lost their Christian history back to its original intent and purposes. Welcome to Redeeming the Times, where we talk about God's original intents and purposes for these holidays. Join me today as we talk a little bit about what redeeming the times really means. Welcome back. So obviously, the next holiday that is coming up is Valentine's Day. And we all think of Valentine's Day as the time to get chocolates, and you've got that little flying winged thing. What do we call that? Cupid. And he flies down and shoots people with love arrows, and they somehow love each other. What is the history behind this? And can it be redeemed for a biblical and godly principle? Well, actually, the celebration of Valentine's Day dates back to a Roman celebration called Lupercalia. I think I'm saying that right. Lupercalia. However, around 270, Christians reclaimed the holy day and redeemed it for a Christian purpose. Now, remember, when we're using the term holy day or holiday, it literally means a day set apart for a specific and godly purpose, really. And so we're told nowadays that Valentine's Day is about romance. It's a day to buy your sweetheart something, right? To buy chocolates and hold hands. And especially we see that winged dude Cupid on commercials and things like that. And Cupid is so cute and innocent, there shouldn't be anything bad about him, right? Well, let's go back to Rome. In the early days of Rome, Romans were deists. They worshipped one goddess. It was the moon goddess at that time. And Romans were not really well known for philosophy or creativity or education or much of anything, really. The Romans were known for two main things. They were great at war and they were great at adaptation. And so what would happen is every time Romans would go and conquer someone, they say, well, what are you guys doing great? Awesome. That's now Roman. You're good at agriculture? Great. You're going to teach us all of that, and it's going to now be Roman. When the Romans conquered the Greeks were great teachers, and they were great philosophers. So literally, they came in and conquered the Greeks and said, you will now teach all of our language and our education and all of these things. There were no more Roman teachers past that. And the Greeks quickly influenced Roman society so much that actually the religious system of Romans was changed and influenced by the philosophy of the Grecians. This is why it is so important for parents to be personally involved in the education of their children. Because when they weren't involved here in Rome, we saw Rome's entire religious system changed because of the education of their children. I'm not against any type of education. What I'm saying is, no matter how your child is educated, if it's public school, private school, homeschool, all that type of stuff, it is important for the parent to be involved in the education of their children. Know what your kids are learning. Ask questions. See, when the Romans just gave their kids over to however they would be taught, it was they came back with a completely different religious mindset. It changed the religion of all of Rome. In fact, so much so that there was this very large, the largest worship center in all of Rome was the temple to the goddess Aphrodite. Really for them, it was of Venus and Rome. Now, what the Romans did was they renamed all of the Greek gods and goddesses. Zeus was now Jupiter, right? Ares was Mars. Artemis was Diana. Hermes was Mercury. And Aphrodite was now Venus. Now, it housed a whole bunch of different little gods and goddesses that would be on the walls as you're walking through. But highlighted in the very center of this temple were two specific gods and goddesses. There was Venus or Aphrodite, and there was Rome Eternal. Now, Rome eternal was the worship of Rome as a place, as a country, that they worshiped him. Now, when we talk about Aphrodite, and I ask most people, oh, what was Aphrodite the goddess of? Almost everyone would say Aphrodite is the goddess of love, right? Problem is, she never was the goddess of love. She was the goddess of passion, sex, fertility, and prostitution. Love has nothing to do with it. What's love got to do with nothing? It's got nothing to do with it, right? How the Romans saw love was tainted. And literally, we see in this temple, these two gods and goddesses almost holding hands, Rome immortal and Aphrodite, or literally saying the way that we view love is what makes us Romans. And because their worship connected to something that wasn't love at all, how Romans saw love was tainted. What does that have to do with us today in Valentine's Day? Well, even remember Cupid, right? We think of this weird commercialized version of a cherubim type thing. Actually, Cupid was the son of Aphrodite. Cupid was her son in Roman mythology, or Venus's son. Cupid's purpose was to distribute her will. It wasn't to make people fall in love. It was to make people act upon their fleshly passions. See, in the Bible, Paul knew that Roman Christians had this messed up idea of love, and he was trying to teach them what it really meant to love God, to worship God. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, he says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Literally means your act of worship, because he knew how they viewed worship and loving God. And it was immoral. Right? Paul was beseeching them. He was begging them, because this was a struggle for Roman Christians to wrap their mind around. This is all that they knew. They viewed love as passion, as sex, as selfish needs, and fulfilling those selfish desires. But that's not love. Paul wanted them to understand what real love was. Now, fast forward, right, about 150 years after Paul wrote his letter to the Romans, there was a Roman emperor named Claudius II. There was also a priest named Valentine. Now, there was a possibility of this being three different priests named Valentine and all their stories coming together, but we're not going to talk about that today. What we do know is that these stories would have all been at the same time, during the same period, and during the time of Emperor Claudius II. Emperor Claudius II had this idea that he wanted to outlaw marriage. Why? Because he had this idea that people didn't want to fight for his Roman legion anymore, not because they didn't believe in what Rome was doing, since Rome was losing a lot. They didn't want to not fight for Rome because Rome was taking the money away from their citizens and pouring them into endless wars that weren't accomplishing anything. No, that's not it. Oh, it must be because my men want to be married. And so if I just outlaw marriage, everyone will want to fight for the glory of Rome. Yeah, great idea, bud. So he does so. He outlaws marriage, and he says, guys, you don't need to be married. You can just act upon your passions however you see fit. Right? I mean, that's the worship of Rome, isn't it? You know, Valentine, though, believed that God had a plan for marriage. And that God had instituted marriage as the first institution of all creation. And so what he would do is he would secretly marry people. Now, it's rare that we hear a prophecy from the Apostle Paul, but he writes one in 1 Timothy chapter 4. Let me read verses 1 to 4. It says it this way. The Spirit speaks expressly that in the later times, right, there will come a depart from the faith. People will give heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry. He said leaders in the latter times who fall away from the true faith will forbid people to marry. The Greek word translated forbid here is kaluo. Kaluo means that they can hinder or stand in the way of marriage. So these men will hinder godly marriage one way or the other. But why make such a big deal about marriage? What's the big deal, Pastor Matt? Well, the devil hates marriage. Marriage is the first institution that God started, even before worship, even before church. He instituted Adam and Eve as a married couple together, right? Marriage shows the world the relationship between God and the church. And marriage is the image of God. Genesis says that he says, let us create them in our image and likeness. Marriage represents the unity of the Godhead, right? It's the idea that these leaders in the latter times, this is what Paul is saying, that in the latter times there will be leaders who come who say that marriage is no big deal. They say it's not important, that people will just live together, they'll just sleep together, and leaders will applaud them and say, it's okay, it's not that big a deal. They'll say things like, well, God is love, and everybody loves each other, so it's just fine. No, it's not. Marriage is more than a contractual agreement. It's a union of a man and a woman under God and in covenant with him. To subtract from this covenant is to subtract from the very foundation that makes society work. The enemy wants to destroy marriage any way that he can because he creates then chaos in society. And chaos is where the devil can do his best work behind the scenes. If he can destroy marriage, then he can break apart Christian influence in society as well. Valentine understood the importance of marriage being a God-ordained institution. So he secretly and privately married people in these ceremonies that was away from the public eye, right? And he was found out and thrown into prison. And he was willing to sacrifice his life, not because he was just preaching Jesus, but because he believed in the institution and the sanctity of marriage. He was willing to deal with the haters. He was willing to deal with the consequences because he believed in marriage that much. While he was in prison, he talked to many of the prison guards, he talked to prisoners, and he actually got them saved. He told them about the love of Jesus. He told them about how much God loved them. And then one of the jailers who heard his heart and knew that he was very learned, I think it is, said, would you teach my daughter how to read? Now, there's many different stories about this. Was the daughter blind? Maybe. That's possible. And that she was healed from her blindness and then had to learn how to read. But what we do know is that she needed to learn how to read. And in the process of of him saying, yes, I will teach your daughter how to read, he said, I will only teach her out of one book. Go and get me my scrolls. And so he brought him a Bible, essentially. He brought him the written word. And he was teaching this jailer's daughter how to read by telling her about Jesus. She got saved. And on the day that he was going to be executed, he wrote a final letter to her, telling her to stay true to the faith, to love God and love people. And he signed it, Your Valentine, which is where we get the idea of passing out Valentine's Day cards. See, Valentine's Day is not about romantic infatuation. It's supposed to be a reminder of the love of God that his church is supposed to share and the vital institution of marriage. When we realize that we've been duped by culture around us, we can reclaim what has been taught us by culture and bring it back to the way that God has designed it. So how do we do that? Well, 3 things really quickly, and then I'm going to end this. Number 1 is this: you need to tell someone, educate people about the history of the celebration. Learn what the Bible has to say about this, but also learn about the history and the rich history of the Christian faith. And the second thing is that we need to celebrate with people. God is the God of a party. Every time that God wanted his people to remember something, he created feasts and festivals, times for people to party and celebrate, because he knew that was the best way for people to remember what my word says, is to set up parties, right? That's the whole history of the Jewish celebrations, that they're supposed to come together with family and to celebrate. And so celebrate these institutions. Celebrate Valentine's Day. Remind your kids about the real story. Remind your kids about the love of God, right? And 3 is this: look for opportunities to redeem things. We're called to redeem the times. Maybe there's going to be moments that people are trying to make this celebration something that it isn't. Find an opportunity to speak into those moments godly purposes, godly passion, godly, what the Word says about these things. Paul knew this, and he wanted the Romans to really understand love. I want to finish with this. In Romans 12, starting in verse 9, it says it this way, the New Living Translation: don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection, and take delight in honoring each other. Happy Valentine's Day. Celebrate correctly. Celebrate, and let us redeem the time together.